The handcuffs bit into Ethan Mercer's wrists as the bailiff shoved him toward the defendant's stand. Judge Helena Crawford slammed her palm on the bench and laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed through the packed courtroom. "You speak 11 languages? And I'm the Queen of England." Ethan didn't flinch. He looked her dead in the eyes. "Give me 5 minutes, Your Honor. Just 5, and I'll make you apologize in front of everyone." Her laughter stopped cold. What happened next would destroy careers, expose a decades-old conspiracy, and reveal that Ethan's dead father had been hiding a secret worth killing for. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The handcuffs were too tight. Ethan Mercer felt the metal biting into his wrists as 2 sheriff's deputies pushed him through the double doors of courtroom 4B. He'd asked them twice to loosen the cuffs. They'd ignored him both times. Story of his life, really. People had been ignoring him for 41 years. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. Ethan could feel hundreds of eyes drilling into his back as he walked toward the defendant's dock. Journalists lined the walls, notepads ready, phones recording. Someone in the gallery whispered loud enough for him to hear, "That's him, the fraud." Ethan kept his head down. Not because he was ashamed, because he'd learned a long time ago that looking people in the eye only invited trouble when you came from where he came from. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed through the room. Everyone stood as Judge Helena Crawford swept in through the side door, her black robes billowing behind her like a storm cloud. She was a small woman, maybe 5'3", but she carried herself like she was 7 feet tall. Silver hair pulled back tight, reading glasses perched on her nose. And that look Ethan had seen on the 1,000 faces throughout his life, the look that said, "I already know everything I need to know about you." "Be seated," Crawford ordered. She dropped into her chair with the casual authority of someone who'd spent 22 years deciding other people's fates. Ethan remained standing between the 2 deputies. His court-appointed lawyer, Ben Walsh, stood at his left. A tired man in his 50s, with coffee stains on his tie and the haunted eyes of someone who'd seen too many innocent people go down. "Case number 2024-CR-4471, the clerk announced. "The People versus Ethan James Mercer. Charges include obtaining financial advantage by deception, identity fraud, and aggravated fraud, totaling approximately $200,000. The whispers in the gallery intensified. Ethan heard the word "con man" float through the air like poison. Crown Prosecutor Victoria Sterling rose from her seat with theatrical precision. She was the kind of woman who'd never worked a day of hard labor in her life. Perfectly manicured nails, designer suit, that Ivy League accent that immediately told you she'd grown up with silver spoons and trust funds. "Your Honor," Sterling began, her voice dripping with practiced compassion. "What we have before us today is a cautionary tale, a story of desperation leading to deception." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "For the past 3 years, Mr. Mercer has been operating what can only be described as an elaborate con. He posed as a certified professional translator, offering his services to multinational corporations, educational institutions, and, most troublingly, government agencies." Sterling walked slowly in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. He collected nearly $200,000 for translations he claimed to perform in 11 different languages. She let out a small laugh. 11, Your Honor. Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Italian, Hebrew, and Vietnamese. She turned toward Ethan with that smile, the one that pretended to be sympathetic, but was really just condescension wearing a mask. "Mr. Mercer is a single father. We understand that. We understand that financial pressure can make people do desperate things. But fraud is fraud, Your Honor. She gestured toward Ethan like he was an exhibit in a museum. And the reality is, this man has no university degree, no professional certifications, no formal training in any language. According to our records, he barely graduated high school. Ethan's jaw tightened. He could feel Ben Walsh shifting nervously beside him. So how, Sterling continued, does a man with no qualifications convince major corporations to pay him thousands of dollars for translations? She paused for effect. The answer is simple. He's a very good liar. Objection! Ben Walsh's voice was uncertain. Counsel is presenting opinion as fact. Judge Crawford barely glanced at him. Overruled. Continue, Miss Sterling. Sterling smiled. Thank you, Your Honor. As I was saying, Mr. Mercer grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. His father was a janitor, a cleaner. He has no history of international travel, no record of formal language education, nothing, absolutely nothing to suggest he possesses the abilities he claims. She picked up a thick folder from her desk and held it up. We have statements from 3 clients who paid Mr. Mercer for translations that were, in their words, completely unusable. We have evidence of falsified credentials. We have a pattern of deception stretching back years. Sterling set the folder down and faced the judge directly. The people request that Mr. Mercer be held without bail pending trial. He's a flight risk, Your Honor. A con man with nothing to lose. Judge Crawford nodded slowly, flipping through papers on her desk. Thank you, Miss Sterling. She looked up at Ben Walsh with the kind of disinterest that told Ethan everything he needed to know about how this was going to go. Does the defense have anything to say? Ben cleared his throat. His hands were trembling slightly. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. Too many cases, not enough wins. Your Honor, my client maintains his complete innocence. The charges against him are based on misunderstandings and an inadequate investigation. Mr. Mercer is prepared to demonstrate that he possesses every capability he has claimed. Crawford's eyebrows shot up. For the first time, she actually looked interested. Demonstrate? She leaned forward. And how exactly does he plan to demonstrate that he speaks 11 languages? Is he going to perform a magic trick for us? Maybe pull a rabbit out of a hat while reciting Shakespeare in Mandarin? Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Sterling covered her mouth, trying to hide her smile. Even some of the jurors chuckled. Your Honor, with respect, Ben tried to continue. Mr. Walsh, Crawford cut him off with a wave of her hand. I've read this file. Your client is 41 years old. He grew up in the Rust Belt. His father was a janitor who cleaned office buildings until he dropped dead of a heart attack. There's no record of higher education, no international certifications, no evidence whatsoever that this man could speak 3 languages, let alone 11. She took off her reading glasses and stared directly at Ethan. Mr. Mercer, I'm going to give you some free advice. Take whatever deal the prosecution offers you. Plead guilty. Do your time. Because if you waste this court's time with some kind of circus performance, I will personally ensure you receive the maximum sentence. Ethan felt something shift inside him. It was a feeling he'd known his whole life. That hot, tight sensation in his chest whenever someone looked at him and saw nothing. Whenever someone heard where he came from and made assumptions. Whenever someone glanced at his work boots and his calloused hands and decided they already knew his whole story. He'd been swallowing that feeling for 41 years. He was done swallowing. Permission to speak, Your Honor. His voice came out clear and strong, stronger than he expected. The courtroom went quiet. Even Sterling looked surprised. Defendants didn't usually speak during preliminary hearings. They sat there and let their lawyers do the talking and hoped for the best. Crawford stared at him like he'd just sprouted a second head. Excuse me? I said, Permission to speak. Ethan met her eyes. You've been talking about me for the past 20 minutes. Making jokes, laughing. You've got a whole room full of people who've already decided I'm guilty, based on nothing but where I grew up and what my father did for a living. Mr. Mercer. Ben grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. Ethan shook him off. I'm not a con man, Your Honor. I'm not a fraud. I speak 11 languages fluently, and I can prove it. Right here, right now, if you'll give me the chance. The silence that followed was so complete that Ethan could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. And then Judge Helena Crawford did something no one expected. She laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a controlled smile. She threw her head back and let out a roar of laughter that shook her entire body. It was the kind of laugh you'd expect from someone watching a comedy show, not from someone sitting on the bench of a federal courtroom. "Oh my God!" Crawford gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. "This is absolutely priceless!" She looked at Sterling. "Did you hear that, counselor? The defendant wants to prove he speaks 11 languages. Right here, right now, in my courtroom." Sterling was laughing too. So were several people in the gallery. The sound bounced off the walls, surrounding Ethan like a wave of humiliation. "Your Honor," Crawford continued, still chuckling, "I've been on this bench for 22 years. 22 years, and I have never had a defendant try to pull something this ridiculous." She leaned forward, her laughter fading into a cold, hard smile. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Mercer. I grew up in Boston. My father was a surgeon. I went to Harvard Law. I've spent my entire life surrounded by educated, accomplished people. And in all that time, I've met exactly 3 people who could speak more than 5 languages fluently. 3. And all of them had PhDs in linguistics." She pointed at him. "You're a janitor's son from Ohio. You want me to believe you speak more languages than most university professors?" She shook her head. "That's not impressive, Mr. Mercer. That's sad. It's pathological. You've actually convinced yourself of your own lies." Ethan didn't flinch. "5 minutes. He said quietly. "That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes to prove what I can do." "And why should I waste 5 minutes of this court's time?" "Because if you don't, and I'm telling the truth, then you just denied an innocent man the chance to defend himself." Ethan paused, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "And that would make you the fraud, Your Honor, not me." The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the journalists stopped writing. Judge Crawford's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, then anger, then something that might have been grudging respect, then back to anger. "You've got nerve," she said slowly. "I'll give you that. Nerve and absolutely no sense of self-preservation." She looked at Sterling. "Counselor, any objection to letting the defendant humiliate himself?" Sterling shrugged elegantly. "Not at all, Your Honor. In fact, I think it will only strengthen our case." Crawford turned back to Ethan, that cold smile returning. "All right, Mr. Mercer. You want your 5 minutes? I'll give you something better." She leaned back in her chair. "I'm going to bring in 11 professors from the state university, 1 specialist in each of the languages you claim to speak, and I'm going to tell them to be as rigorous as possible. No softball questions, no easy tests. Real professional evaluation." She leaned forward again. "And when you fail, because you will fail, I'm going to add charges of contempt and obstruction of justice to your case. You'll be looking at an extra 5 years. Minimum." She let that sink in. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "And you still want to proceed?" "Yes." Crawford shook her head in disbelief. Fine. This hearing is adjourned for 3 days while I arrange the evaluation. She banged her gavel and stood to leave, but stopped at the door. Mr. Mercer. Ethan looked up. I've been doing this job for over 2 decades. I've seen every kind of con artist, every kind of liar, every kind of desperate person trying to talk their way out of trouble. And I've never, not once, been wrong about someone. She smiled that cold smile one more time. You're going to wish you'd taken the deal. The holding cell smelled like disinfectant and despair. Ethan sat on the thin mattress, staring at the concrete wall, replaying the hearing in his mind. The laughter, the mockery, Crawford's absolute certainty that he was lying. Hey! A voice from the next cell. Ethan looked up to see an older man with gray hair and tired eyes watching him through the bars. You're the language guy, right? The one who told off Judge Crawford? Ethan nodded. Man, the guy whistled low. Word travels fast in here. Everyone's talking about you. Said you looked her right in the eye and called her a fraud. Something like that. That took guts. The man moved closer to the bars. Name's Derek. Derek Murphy. Been in and out of places like this most of my life. Never once saw anyone talk to Crawford like that. She's got a reputation, you know. They call her the Hammer. She's ended more careers and destroyed more lives than anyone else on that bench. Ethan didn't respond. He was too tired to talk. So is it true? Derek pressed. You really speak 11 languages? 12, actually. Derek laughed, but it wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of someone genuinely surprised. 12? Then why'd you only say 11? Because nobody asked about the 12th one. Derek studied him for a long moment. You're not like the other guys in here, are you? Most people who end up on Crawford's docket, they're either guilty as sin or too scared to fight back. But you actually believe you can beat her. I don't believe anything, Ethan said quietly. I know what I can do. I've known it my whole life. The problem is, nobody else has ever bothered to find out. So tell me. Derek sat down on his own bunk, settling in like he had all the time in the world. How does a guy from Youngstown end up speaking 12 languages? That's not exactly a common skill set around here. Ethan was quiet for a long time. The question brought back memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Memories of his father. Memories of those big, empty houses they used to clean together. Memories of the children he'd played with and the families he'd loved and lost. My father, Ethan finally said. His name was Walter Mercer. He worked his whole life as a janitor. Started out cleaning offices at night. Learned everything, one word at a time. He paused, the memories washing over him. After a few years, he got better work. Started cleaning houses for diplomatic families, ambassadors, consuls, trade representatives, people from all over the world who were stationed here for a few years at a time. Fancy gig. It was steady work, good pay, and the families, they were different from what you'd expect. Most of them treated my dad with respect. Some of them even became friends. Ethan looked down at his hands, the same hands that had held mops and brooms alongside his father for years. When my mom died, I was 5. Dad didn't have anyone to leave me with, so he brought me along. Every night, every weekend, every holiday. I grew up in those houses, Derek. While my dad was cleaning, I was playing with the family's kids. And that's how you learned. That's how I learned. The Schmidt family taught me German. The Dubois family taught me French. The Chen family taught me Mandarin. The Al-Rahmans taught me Arabic. Ethan's voice grew distant, lost in the past. Every 2 or 3 years, the families would rotate out. New country, new assignment. I'd lose the friends I'd made, the people I'd come to think of as family. And then a new family would arrive, speaking a new language, and I'd start all over again. That must have been hard, losing people like that, over and over. It was, Ethan nodded slowly. But it was also a gift. Every language I learned, every family I loved, they became a part of me. I carry them with me everywhere I go. Derek was quiet for a moment, processing what he'd heard. So what happened? Why are you here? Ethan laughed bitterly. Because I made the mistake of trying to use what I know. I tried to get jobs with translation agencies, but they all wanted degrees, certifications, proof. Nobody would even let me take a test. So I started my own business, offered my services online, charged less than the big agencies, did twice the quality work. And someone reported you. 3 someones. Corporate clients who decided it was easier to blame me for their own problems than to admit they'd made mistakes. Ethan leaned back against the wall. The thing is, Derek, my translations were perfect, every single one. I triple-checked everything. But it doesn't matter to people like Judge Crawford. I'm just a janitor's son who got too big for his britches. They don't want to know if I'm telling the truth. They've already decided I'm guilty. So prove them wrong. Derek's voice was firm. You've got 3 days. Use them. That's the plan. No, I mean really use them. Not just sitting here feeling sorry for yourself. Prepare, study, get ready for whatever those professors throw at you. Ethan looked at him. Why do you care? Derek smiled, a sad, knowing smile. Because I've been where you are. Not the language thing, but the feeling of nobody believing you. The feeling of the whole system stacked against you. And I've spent most of my life watching guys like us get crushed by people like Crawford. He stood up and moved back to the bars. But every once in a while, someone comes along who actually has a chance to beat them. And when that happens, man, it gives the rest of us hope. Ethan didn't know what to say. In his whole life, he couldn't remember a stranger believing in him like this. Get some sleep, Derek said. You're going to need it. The next morning, Ethan was transferred to the county facility to await his evaluation. His new cell was smaller than he expected. 2 bunks, a sink, a toilet, and a window so high it only served as a reminder that the sky existed, but he couldn't reach it. His cellmate was already there when he arrived. A man in his 60s, with silver hair and deep lines carved into his face by years of hard living. You Mercer? The man asked without looking up from his book. Yeah? I'm Raymond. Ray. He finally looked up, studying Ethan with sharp, intelligent eyes. They told me you were coming. You're the one who's going to take on 11 professors in 3 days. Word travels fast in here. Word's about all we've got. Ray closed his book and set it aside. So, what's your plan? My plan? For the evaluation. Crawford's going to stack the deck against you. She's probably already called the university and told them to send their toughest examiners. You ready for that? Ethan sat down on the top bunk. I've been speaking these languages my whole life. I don't need to prepare. Bullshit. The word hung in the air between them. Excuse me? Ray stood up, and despite his age, there was nothing frail about him. I said bullshit. You think speaking a language conversationally is the same as being tested by professors? They're not going to ask you to order coffee in French or give directions in German. They're going to hit you with technical vocabulary, legal terms, medical terminology, scientific jargon, the kind of stuff that takes years of specialized study to master. Ethan felt his confidence waver slightly. He hadn't thought about that. How do you know so much about language testing? Because I used to be a professor. Ray's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. Linguistics department at Columbia, 30 years, until I made some bad decisions and ended up in here. You're a linguist? Was. Now I'm just another inmate counting down the days. He walked to the small shelf bolted to the wall and pulled down a stack of worn books. But that doesn't mean I can't help you. He handed the books to Ethan. German legal texts, French medical terminology, Arabic scientific papers. How did you? I've been here a while. Made some friends. Called in some favors. Ray sat back down on his bunk. Look, I don't know if you're telling the truth about speaking 11 languages. Honestly, I don't care. What I do know is that Crawford is a snake, and the system she represents has destroyed too many good people. He looked at Ethan with something that might have been hope. If you've got a real chance to beat her, to make her eat her words in front of the whole world, then I want to help make that happen. Ethan looked at the books in his hands. Legal German, medical French, scientific Arabic. The kind of specialized vocabulary he'd never had reason to study before. How much can I learn in 3 days? Ray smiled grimly. Let's find out. For the next 72 hours, Ethan barely slept. Ray drilled him relentlessly, throwing technical terms at him in every language, testing his comprehension, correcting his pronunciation. Other inmates started gathering at their cell door during exercise hours, listening as Ethan rattled off complex legal terminology in German, medical procedures in French, chemical formulas in Arabic. Word spread through the facility. The language guy was the real deal. On the second night, a young guard named Torres approached the cell during her rounds. Mercer. Ethan looked up from his Arabic textbook. You've got a visitor. Lawyer says it's urgent. Ben Walsh was waiting in the interview room, looking even more exhausted than before. But there was something different in his eyes, something that might have been excitement. Ethan, I've got news. Ben's hands were shaking as he spread papers across the table. One of your accusers came to see me this morning, James Chen. The corporate manager. What about him? He recanted. Ben's voice cracked with emotion. He admitted that his company made him lie. Your translations were perfect, Ethan. Chen said they were the best work his company had ever received. But when his boss found out Chen had hired someone without credentials, he made Chen file a fraud complaint to cover his own ass. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Validation. After all these years. Chen brought documents, Ben continued. Emails from his partners in Beijing praising your work. Internal memos showing the translations were approved without changes. And his sworn statement admitting he lied under corporate pressure. That's only one accuser. What about the other two? I'm working on them, but this, Ben tapped the papers, this changes everything. If we can prove the fraud charges were fabricated, the whole case falls apart. Ethan nodded slowly. But I still have to pass the evaluation. Crawford's not going to drop the charges just because one accuser recanted. She's got too much pride invested in seeing me fail. I know. Ben gathered the papers. That's why you have to be perfect. Not just good. Perfect. Show them something they've never seen before. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Ethan, I've been a public defender for 23 years. I've had a lot of clients. Most of them were guilty. The innocent ones usually couldn't prove it. He met Ethan's eyes. But you, I think you might actually be able to do this. I think you might be able to beat them. What makes you say that? Ben smiled tiredly. Because I've never seen anyone study the way you do. Like every word matters. Like your whole life depends on it. It does, Ethan said quietly. My daughter's waiting for me. I promised her I'd come home. The night before the evaluation, Ethan sat alone in his cell. Ray was asleep. The facility was quiet. In a few hours, he would face 11 professors who had been specifically selected to destroy him. He thought about his father. Walter Mercer had worked his whole life without complaint. He'd started with nothing. No connections, no education, no advantages. He'd worked his way up from dishwasher to janitor to house cleaner, one job at a time. He'd never felt sorry for himself, just kept moving forward, one day at a time. And every night, after working 12-hour shifts cleaning other people's homes, he would come back to their tiny apartment and teach Ethan everything he'd learned. Not just the work, but the fragments of other languages he'd picked up along the way. The German phrases Mrs. Schmidt taught him, the French expressions Mr. Dubois used, the Mandarin characters the Chen children wrote in their homework. "Language is power, son," his father used to say in his quiet voice. "They cannot take from you what you know. They cannot steal what is in your head." Walter Mercer had died of a heart attack at 62. 50 years of hard labor had finally broken his body. But his mind had been sharp until the very end. Ethan still remembered the last thing his father said to him. "You have gifts, Ethan. You hear what others cannot hear. You understand what others cannot understand. Use it. Use it to be more than what they expect you to be." Ethan closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would honor his father's memory. Tomorrow, he would prove them all wrong. The courtroom was even more packed than before. News of Ethan's confrontation with Judge Crawford had spread like wildfire. Media trucks lined the street outside. Journalists from across the country had flown in to witness what everyone was calling the language trial. Social media was already buzzing with hashtags and hot takes. Ethan walked to the defendant's dock in a clean suit Ben had somehow managed to get for him. His handcuffs had been removed, a small victory negotiated by his lawyer. He stood straight, shoulders back, meeting the eyes of everyone who looked at him. In the front row, 11 professors sat in a special section, each one holding folders and papers for their respective languages. Ethan recognized some of them from news articles and academic journals. Distinguished academics with decades of experience and dozens of published papers. They looked at him the way scientists look at lab specimens. Clinical, detached, ready to dissect. Judge Crawford entered with her usual ceremony. But there was something different about her today. A barely contained excitement. The expression of someone who was about to watch a public execution and couldn't wait to see the blood. "This court is now in session," she announced. "We are here to conduct a professional evaluation of the defendant's claimed linguistic abilities." She turned to the professors with a warm smile, the first genuine warmth Ethan had ever seen from her. "Professors, thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to assist this court. As I explained when I contacted you, the defendant claims to speak 11 languages fluently, despite having no formal education or credentials. Your job today is to determine whether these claims have any merit whatsoever." She looked at Ethan, and her smile turned cold. "Mr. Mercer, I hope you're ready, because this is the most rigorous language evaluation ever conducted in a courtroom. When it's over, there will be no more room for lies." Ethan said nothing. He simply waited. The first professor stood, a middle-aged Asian woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "I am Professor Linda Tanaka," she announced. "I hold doctorates in both Mandarin Chinese and Japanese linguistics from Stanford. I have been testing language proficiency for over 20 years. She handed Ethan a thick document. "This is a medical text regarding cardiovascular surgical procedures, written in traditional Chinese characters. You will read it aloud, then translate it into English, and explain its medical implications." Ethan looked at the document. Dense columns of Chinese characters filled the page, describing complex surgical techniques with terminology that most native speakers would struggle to understand. He took a breath, and then he began to read. His voice filled the courtroom, clear, precise, with perfect Mandarin tones that made Professor Tanaka's eyes widen involuntarily. He didn't just read the text. He brought it to life, explaining each procedure, each medical term, each cultural nuance in the language that a Western doctor might miss. When he finished, he switched to English without pause, translating not just the words, but the deeper meaning, adding context about how Chinese medical philosophy differs from Western approaches. The courtroom was silent. Professor Tanaka sat down slowly, her face pale. She leaned over to whisper to her colleague, and Ethan heard her words clearly. "His pronunciation is flawless. That's not possible without years of formal training." Judge Crawford's smile had faded slightly. But this was only the beginning. Professor Heinrich Mueller stood next. He was a thick man with a blonde beard and the stern expression of someone who had spent his entire life in the rigid structure of German academia. His reputation preceded him. Colleagues called him the executioner, because no student had ever passed his oral examinations on the first try. "Mr. Mercer," Mueller said, his English heavy with a Bavarian accent, "I have here a contract from the German Federal Court of Justice. It contains 17 clauses regarding international commercial arbitration. You will read it aloud, identify any legal ambiguities, and explain the implications under both German and American law." He handed Ethan a document so dense with legal terminology that even native German lawyers would need hours to parse it properly. Ethan took the paper. His eyes moved across the Gothic script, absorbing the complex sentence structures that German legal writing was infamous for. He could feel the entire courtroom watching him, waiting for him to stumble, waiting for the moment when the fraud would finally be exposed. He began to read. The German flowed from his mouth like water, precise, formal, with that particular rhythm that legal German demanded. But Ethan didn't just read. He stopped at Clause 7 and looked up. "There's a problem here," he said in German, then switched to English. "This clause contradicts Clause 12. Under German law, this ambiguity would void the entire arbitration agreement. Any competent lawyer would catch this before signing." Mueller's face went red. That document was prepared by the German Federal Ministry of Justice. Then someone at the ministry made a mistake. Ethan handed the paper back. Clause 7 grants exclusive jurisdiction to Frankfurt courts. Clause 12 allows for venue selection by the defendant. You can't have both. It's basic contract law. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Mueller sat down without another word, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Judge Crawford's fingers were tapping rapidly on her desk. The rhythm was irregular, agitated. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. "Next," Crawford said, her voice tight. Professor Amira Hassan rose. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, draped in a silk hijab, with the bearing of someone who had grown up in the highest circles of Arab society. Her specialty was classical Arabic, the ancient formal language of the Quran and pre-Islamic poetry. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice musical but sharp, "I will not insult you with modern Arabic. Any tourist can learn to order food in Cairo. Instead, I have prepared something more challenging." She handed him a single page of handwritten text. "This is a passage from Al-Mutanabi, the greatest poet of the Arabic language, 10th century. His work is considered untranslatable by most scholars because the meaning exists in layers: historical, spiritual, linguistic." She paused, a small smile playing on her lips. "You will read it, explain its meaning, and then you will compose an original response in the same classical style." Ethan looked at the text. The calligraphy was beautiful, ancient, the kind of Arabic that had been written when Europe was still in the Dark Ages. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he began to speak. The Arabic that came from his mouth was not the Arabic of street vendors or news broadcasts. It was the Arabic of scholars and poets, of caliphs and philosophers. His voice took on a melodic quality, rising and falling with the internal rhythms of the verse. He recited the passage. Then he explained its meaning. Not just the surface words, but the historical context, the theological implications, the way Al-Mutanabi had used specific phonetic patterns to create emotional resonance. And then, without pause, Ethan began to compose. His original verse flowed in the same classical style, using the same meter, the same rhyme scheme. Speaking of justice and truth, of the blindness of those who judge by appearance rather than substance. When he finished, Professor Hassan was crying. "How?" she whispered, forgetting the formality of the courtroom. "How is this possible? I have students who study for decades and cannot do what you just did." "The Al-Rahman family," Ethan said quietly, switching to English. Dr. Al-Rahman was an imam before he became a diplomat. He believed that Arabic was not just a language, but a way of seeing the universe. He said every word has a root, a history, a connection to all other words. He taught me to hear the poetry in everything. Hassan wiped her eyes and sat down. She did not look at Judge Crawford. The prosecutor, Victoria Sterling, was no longer smiling. She was flipping through her notes frantically, searching for something, anything, that might salvage her case. "Your Honor," Sterling said, standing abruptly, "I'd like to request a brief recess." "Denied." Crawford's voice was clipped, harsh. "We will proceed." Ethan understood then. Crawford wasn't going to give anyone time to regroup, to reconsider. She had committed herself to his destruction, and she would see it through to the end, even if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Professor Igor Volkov was next. Russian literature. He presented Ethan with a passage from Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. Not the famous parts that every literature student knows, but an obscure philosophical dialogue buried deep in the middle of the novel. Ethan read it in Russian, his accent shifting to match the St. Petersburg dialect of the 19th century. Then he explained the passage's place in Russian literary history, its connection to Orthodox theology, the way Dostoevsky used the character of Ivan to explore the problem of evil. "The Ivanov family," Ethan said, when asked how he knew such things. Mr. Ivanov was a literature professor posted to Washington. He would read Dostoevsky to me while his wife prepared borscht. I was 12. He told me that if you can't feel the Russian suffering in the words, you're not truly reading the masters. Volkov nodded slowly. He was right. French came next. Professor Jean-Pierre Dubois, no relation to the family Ethan had known, though the name brought back memories, tested him with wine terminology so specialized that it seemed designed for failure. Grape varieties, regional designations, the specific vocabulary used by sommeliers to describe the characteristics of a 1947 Cheval Blanc. Ethan answered every question. He explained the difference between terroir and climate, described the proper way to decant a young Burgundy versus an aged Bordeaux, and finished by recommending a food pairing for each wine mentioned, in perfect French with a slight Provençal accent. Mrs. Dubois was a sommelier, Ethan explained. She let me smell the wines while she worked. She said the French of wine is liquid poetry. Every word evokes the land, the sun, the time. You don't translate it. You feel it. Italian tested his knowledge of opera. Portuguese challenged him with Brazilian idioms that differed sharply from European Portuguese. Japanese pushed him through 3 different writing systems and the complex hierarchy of formal speech. Korean demanded mastery of honorifics that changed based on the relative social status of speaker and listener. Each time, Ethan passed. Each time, he added the human story behind his knowledge, the families who had taught him, the children he had played with, the homes where he had grown up invisible but absorbing everything. By the 10th language, the courtroom had transformed. The mockery was gone. The whispers had shifted from skepticism to awe. Journalists were texting their editors, telling them to clear the front page. And Judge Crawford's face had turned to stone. "One more," she said, her voice barely controlled. "Professor Vaughn, you may proceed." Andrew Vaughn stood. Unlike the other professors who had shown varying degrees of respect as Ethan proved himself, Vaughn's expression remained contemptuous. He was a tall man with thin lips and cold eyes, the kind of academic who believed credentials were everything and lived experience was nothing. "I have saved the most difficult test for last," Vaughn announced. Hebrew. Not modern Hebrew, the kind spoken in Tel Aviv, but ancient Hebrew, the language of the Torah, the Talmud, the great religious commentaries. He pulled a document from his briefcase with theatrical slowness. "This is a philosophical treatise on the nature of justice, written in classical Hebrew. It contains theological arguments that have been debated by scholars for centuries. You will read it, translate it, and explain its relevance to contemporary ethics." He handed Ethan the document. Ethan looked at it and froze. The courtroom went silent. After 10 successful tests, after 10 languages conquered, this sudden hesitation was jarring. Sterling sat up straighter. Crawford leaned forward, hope rekindling in her eyes. "Is there a problem, Mr.
Mercer?" Vaughn asked, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Perhaps this is finally beyond your abilities." Ethan looked up slowly. His expression had changed. The calm focus was gone, replaced by something else entirely. Recognition, mixed with disbelief, mixed with a cold, burning anger. "I know this text," Ethan said quietly. Vaughn blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said, I know this text." Ethan's voice grew stronger. "I know it because I translated it 6 years ago." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to stop humming. "That's absurd," Vaughn said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "This is an ancient philosophical manuscript. You couldn't possibly—" "Not the original manuscript." Ethan stepped forward, still holding the document. "The translation. This exact translation. I did it 6 years ago for an online client who wanted to remain anonymous. He paid well. Requested complete confidentiality. I spent 3 weeks on it, researching every word, every concept, every theological implication." He looked at Vaughn with eyes that could cut glass. "And 4 years ago, you published an academic paper titled New Interpretations of Hebrew Ethical Texts. I read that paper, Professor, because I was curious to see how scholars approached the same material I had translated." Ethan paused, letting the words sink in. "You used my translation word for word, without credit, without attribution, without even changing the punctuation." The courtroom exploded. Journalists leaped to their feet. The other professors turned to stare at Vaughn with expressions of horror. Ben Walsh grabbed his phone and started typing frantically. "That is a lie!" Vaughn shouted, his face purple with rage. "This is a desperate attempt to—" "Your Honor," Ethan cut him off, his voice cold and clear.
My laptop is currently in police custody as evidence.
On that laptop are all my work files, including the original translation of this document, dated 6 years ago. Draft versions, research notes, email correspondence with the anonymous client. Everything. He looked at Crawford. I request that the court examine those files immediately. If I'm lying, you'll know within minutes. But if I'm telling the truth, he turned back to Vaughn. Then one of the professors you handpicked to evaluate me is a plagiarist who built his academic reputation on stolen work. Vaughn's composure shattered completely. You can't prove anything. You're a fraud, a con man, and this is just a desperate trick to... Professor Vaughn. Judge Crawford's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Her face was unreadable, but her hands were gripping the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles had turned white. I suggest you stop talking immediately. She turned to the bailiff. Bring me that laptop. Now. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Ethan's life. A court technician retrieved the laptop from evidence storage. Under judicial supervision, Ben Walsh navigated to Ethan's work files while the entire courtroom watched on a projection screen. The folder was there. Hebrew Translation Project, 2018. Inside were dozens of files, draft versions dated over a 3-week period, research notes in both Hebrew and English, email threads with a client identified only by an encrypted address, and the final document, time-stamped 6 years ago, matching Vaughn's published paper, word for word. "Oh my God," someone in the gallery whispered. Professor Hassan stood up, her face twisted with disgust. "Andrew, tell me this isn't true." Vaughn said nothing. His face had gone gray. Professor Mueller rose as well. "You plagiarized from an uncredentialed translator. You built your career on stolen work." "I received that translation from a colleague," Vaughn stammered. "I had no way of knowing." "That's not how academia works." Mueller's German accent thickened with anger. "We verify sources. We attribute credit. This is foundational. This is basic. You have dishonored yourself and everyone associated with you." Crawford banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order, but the damage was done. The professors were arguing among themselves. The journalists were practically climbing over each other to get better shots. And Ethan stood in the middle of it all, finally vindicated. After 6 years of wondering why his work had appeared under someone else's name. "Order!" Crawford shouted. "I said order!" Gradually, the chaos subsided. People returned to their seats. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Ethan was no longer the defendant on trial. Vaughn was. "Professor Vaughn," Crawford said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You are excused from this proceeding. I strongly suggest you contact an attorney. The university will be notified, and this court will consider whether criminal charges for fraud are warranted." Vaughn stood frozen for a moment, as if unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then he gathered his briefcase and walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. The door closed behind him with a sound like a coffin lid. Crawford sat in silence for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Stripped of its arrogance, its mockery, its absolute certainty. "Mr. Mercer, the evaluation is complete." She looked at the remaining professors. "Do the evaluators have any doubts about the defendant's linguistic capabilities?" One by one, the professors shook their heads. Professor Hassan spoke for all of them. "Your Honor, in my 20 years of assessing language proficiency, I have never witnessed anything like what I saw today. Mr. Mercer doesn't simply speak these languages, he embodies them. His knowledge goes beyond vocabulary and grammar to encompass cultural context, historical significance, and emotional resonance." She paused,
looking at Ethan with something like reverence. He is, without question, one of the most remarkable linguists I have ever encountered. And he achieved this without formal education, without institutional support, without any of the advantages that most scholars take for granted. That makes his accomplishment not just impressive, but extraordinary. He is a testament to what human beings can achieve when they are driven by genuine passion and love for learning. Crawford absorbed this in silence. Her face was impossible to read, a mask that had served her well through 22 years on the bench, but was now showing cracks around the edges. "Miss Sterling," she said finally, "does the prosecution wish to proceed with the fraud charges?" Sterling stood slowly. She looked like someone who had watched a sure victory transform into a catastrophic defeat and still couldn't quite believe it. "Your Honor, in light of today's developments, and considering that 2 of the 3 complaining witnesses have recanted their statements and confessed to filing false reports under corporate pressure," she took a breath, "the people request permission to withdraw all charges against the defendant." The courtroom erupted again. Cheers mixed with shocked exclamations. Ben Walsh buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed. Ethan felt his knees go weak. "Quiet!" Crawford's gavel crashed down. "I will have order in my courtroom." When silence returned, she turned to Ethan. The mask had slipped further now. Behind it, Ethan could see something he never expected. Shame. "Mr. Mercer," Crawford said, "this court owes you an apology." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was heavy. "I owe you an apology. I looked at your background and made assumptions. I saw where you came from and decided I knew who you were. I allowed prejudice I didn't even know I possessed, to influence my judgment." She removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "You came into my courtroom asking only for a chance to prove yourself, and I mocked you. I laughed at you in front of hundreds of people. I called you a liar before hearing a single word of evidence." Crawford looked at him directly, and for the first time, she seemed human. "That was wrong. It was wrong legally, ethically, and morally. You deserved better from this court. You deserved better from me." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times during his sleepless nights in the cell. The moment when Crawford would be forced to admit she was wrong. In his imagination, he had felt triumphant, vindicated, victorious. But now, standing here, all he felt was tired. "All charges against Ethan James Mercer are hereby dismissed," Crawford announced. "Mr. Mercer, you are free to go. Your personal effects, including your laptop, will be returned to you immediately." She banged her gavel one final time. "This court is adjourned." The chaos that followed was overwhelming. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Ben Walsh hugged Ethan so hard he could barely breathe. The professors crowded around, offering congratulations and business cards and invitations to speak at conferences. But Ethan pushed through all of it, desperate to reach the exit, desperate to get outside where he could breathe, where he could think, where he could process what had just happened. He made it to the courthouse steps before his legs gave out. He sat down on the cold stone and put his head in his hands. And for the first time since his father died, Ethan Mercer cried. He cried for the father who had sacrificed everything so his son could have a better life. He cried for the years of being invisible, overlooked, dismissed. He cried for his daughter Sophie, who was waiting for him to come home. And he cried because after 41 years of being told he wasn't good enough, the world had finally seen who he really was. "Mr. Mercer." Ethan looked up. Through tear-blurred eyes, he saw an older woman standing before him. She was elegant, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, dressed in expensive clothes that spoke of a world very different from his own. "My name is Margaret Morrison," she said softly. "I knew your father. Ethan wiped his eyes, confused. You knew my dad? Very well. He worked for my family for the last 5 years of his life. Margaret sat down beside him on the courthouse steps, not caring that her designer coat was getting dirty. And there are things you need to know, Ethan. Things your father wanted me to tell you when you were ready. What things? Margaret's eyes grew distant. Your father wasn't just a cleaner, Ethan. Oh, he pushed a mop and scrubbed floors, yes. But he was also the bravest man I ever knew. Because while he cleaned, he listened. And he heard things. Terrible things. Things he couldn't ignore. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold stone beneath him. What kind of things? He asked. What are you talking about? Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a worn envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. He discovered a network, Ethan. People using diplomatic immunity as cover for human trafficking. Moving victims across borders, hidden in plain sight within embassy staff and diplomatic families. Your father gathered evidence for years. Names, dates, routes. He documented everything. She pressed the envelope into Ethan's hands. Before he died, he gave me this. He made me promise to keep it safe until you were strong enough to handle the truth. Until the world was ready to listen to you. Ethan stared at the envelope. His hands were trembling. My father died of a heart attack. That's what the official report said. Margaret's voice dropped to barely a whisper. But Ethan, he was getting ready to go public. He had contacted journalists, investigators. He was preparing to expose everything. She looked at him with eyes full of old grief. And then, suddenly, his heart just stopped. No warning, no prior symptoms, just gone. The courthouse steps seemed to tilt beneath Ethan. Everything he thought he knew about his father's death, about his own life, was shifting, rearranging into a new and terrifying pattern. Are you saying someone killed him? I don't know for certain. I only know what he was doing and what happened next. Margaret stood, brushing off her coat. There's more, Ethan, much more. Your father left documents in a safety deposit box in Geneva. Evidence he didn't trust to anyone, not even me. You're the only one who can open it. She handed him a business card. Call me when you're ready, but be careful. The people your father was investigating, they're still out there. And now that you've become famous, now that the whole world knows your name and your story. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Ethan watched her walk away, the envelope heavy in his hands. He thought about his father pushing a mop through empty hallways, listening to conversations in a dozen languages, quietly gathering evidence of crimes no one else even knew existed. His father had given him the gift of languages. But that gift, Ethan now realized, had never been just about communication. It had been preparation for this moment, for this fight, for the truth that was waiting to be told. Ethan opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper covered in his father's handwriting. English words written in a hand that shook slightly. The hand of a man who knew he was running out of time. My son, the letter began, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have finally shown the world who you are. I am proud of you. I was always proud of you. Now you must be strong, because what I am about to tell you will change everything. Ethan read the letter once. Then he read it again. And when he finished, he understood that his father's battle was now his own. The courtroom victory had been just the beginning. The real fight was only starting. That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, the envelope and its contents spread across the kitchen table. Sophie was asleep in her room, finally at peace, knowing her father was home. Mrs. Patterson had brought her back an hour ago, and Ethan had held his daughter for a long time, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. But now, in the quiet darkness, he faced the truth his father had left behind. The letter detailed everything. Names of diplomats who had used their immunity to move people across borders like cargo. Dates of diplomatic shipments that contained human beings instead of documents. Routes through Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, South America. A network that spanned decades and continents, hidden in plain sight within the respectable world of international diplomacy. And at the bottom of the letter, a warning. Do not trust anyone who comes to you asking questions about me. The people I was investigating have connections everywhere. In government, in law enforcement, in the media. If they learn that my evidence still exists, they will come for you. Be careful, my son. Be smarter than I was. And if you choose to continue what I started, know that I will be watching over you, always. Ethan folded the letter and put it in his pocket. His hands had stopped shaking. In their place was something harder, colder. A determination that felt like steel forming in his chest. His phone buzzed. A text from Ben Walsh. "Where are you? Journalists everywhere. Need to get you somewhere safe." Ethan texted back. "Home. I'm fine. Need time to think." Another buzz, this time from an unknown number. "Mr. Mercer, we need to talk." Ethan stared at the screen. His thumb hovered over the delete button, but something made him respond. "Who is this?" "My name is Samuel Cross. I'm a federal agent, and I know what your father was working on." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important right now. What's important is that your life is in danger. The people your father was investigating, they know who you are. They've been watching your case. And now that you're famous, now that the whole world knows your story, they're worried." "Worried about what?" "That you'll do what your father couldn't. That you'll expose them." Ethan glanced toward Sophie's bedroom door. "What do you want?" "To help you. Your father contacted my agency 6 months before he died. He was working with us to build a case against the network. Then he had his heart attack, and everything stopped. We've been waiting for someone to pick up where he left off." "And you think that someone is me?" "I think you're the only person alive who has access to his evidence. And I think you're angry enough and smart enough to use it." Ethan was silent for a moment. His father's warning echoed in his mind. Do not trust anyone. "How do I know you're really a federal agent?" "You don't. Not yet. But I can prove it. Meet me tomorrow, noon, at the coffee shop on the corner of 5th and Main. I'll bring credentials, documents, whatever you need to see. And I'll tell you everything I know about your father's investigation." "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the one who tipped off James Chen. I'm the reason he came forward and recanted his accusation. I've been protecting you from the shadows since your arrest, Mr. Mercer. It's time we started working together in the open." The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone in his hand. His mind was racing, trying to process everything. The letter from his father, the files mentioned in the letter, this mysterious federal agent claiming to be an ally. He should call Ben. He should call the police. He should do something sensible, something safe, something that would protect Sophie. But he thought about his father. 50 years of pushing a mop, keeping his head down, staying invisible. And the moment he tried to do something meaningful, something that mattered, he was silenced. His heart just stopped. No warning, no explanation. Ethan had spent his whole life being invisible too. Overlooked, underestimated. He had played by the rules, kept his head down, tried to build a quiet life for himself and his daughter. And where had it gotten him? Handcuffed in a courtroom, mocked by a judge who had already decided he was guilty before hearing a single word. No more. His father had given him a gift, not just the languages, but the ability to hear what others couldn't hear. to understand what others couldn't understand. And now his father had given him something else. A mission. The next morning, Ethan met Samuel Cross at the coffee shop. The agent was younger than Ethan expected. Mid-30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of alertness that suggested he was always watching, always calculating. He wore a plain gray suit and sat in the corner booth with his back to the wall. Cross showed his credentials. Federal Bureau of Investigation, specialized in human trafficking cases. "Your father was one of our best informants," Cross said, keeping his voice low. "He had access to places we couldn't reach. Diplomatic functions, private residences, embassy events. He gathered more intelligence in 5 years than our entire division had collected in a decade."
Then why didn't you protect him? Cross's jaw tightened. "We tried. We had a plan to bring him in, put him in witness protection, extract him before they could move against him. But someone leaked our timeline. By the time we got to his apartment, he was already gone." "Gone?" Ethan leaned forward. "You mean dead?" "His body was never found, Ethan." The words hit like a physical blow. "What? The official report said heart attack. There was a funeral. I was there." "There was a memorial service, but there was no body at the hospital, no medical records, no death certificate on file with the state. Someone cleaned up after themselves very thoroughly." Ethan felt the world tilt sideways. "Are you saying my father might be alive?" "I'm saying we don't know what happened to him. What we do know is that the network has people inside law enforcement, inside government, inside the intelligence community. They've been operating for decades with virtual impunity. Your father was the first person to seriously threaten them, and they responded accordingly. Then why hasn't your agency taken them down?" "Because every time we get close, our cases fall apart. Witnesses disappear. Evidence gets lost. Prosecutors suddenly decide not to pursue charges." Cross leaned forward. "But you have something we don't have. You have your father's complete files. And you have something else that might be even more valuable." "What's that?" "Public attention. You're famous now, Ethan. The language man who beat the system. The single father who proved the corrupt judge wrong. People are paying attention to you. If you come forward with your father's evidence, if you tell his story to the world, they won't be able to silence you the way they silenced him." Ethan considered this. "What do you need from me?" "Go to Geneva, retrieve your father's evidence, and then let us help you bring these people down. Legally, publicly, permanently." "And Sophie, my daughter?" "We can protect her. Safe house, round-the-clock security, new identity if necessary. Whatever it takes." Ethan thought about his daughter's face when he came home. The way she had clung to him, terrified of losing him again. He had promised her he would never go away. But he also thought about the children in his father's letter, the ones being moved like cargo across international borders, the ones with no one to speak for them. "I'll go to Geneva," Ethan said. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, Sophie stays with people I trust, not a government safe house. My people. Second, I get to choose when and how the evidence goes public. Third, if anything happens to me, if I disappear the way my father did, you make sure the world finds out. You make sure they can't cover it up again." Cross nodded slowly. "Agreed. All of it." They shook hands across the table. "One more thing," Ethan said. "Richard Blackwood, the third accuser, the one who never recanted. I want him. He's protected, connected. Taking him down won't be easy." "I don't care about easy." Ethan's eyes were cold. He helped destroy my life. He helped silence my father. When this is over, I want him to pay." Cross studied him for a long moment, then smiled grimly. "You really are your father's son." That afternoon, Ethan made arrangements. Sophie would stay with Mrs. Patterson and her husband, who agreed to take her in without hesitation. Ben Walsh would handle any legal matters that arose. Derek, his former cellmate who had been released on parole, volunteered to keep watch on the apartment. "You gave me hope in there," Derek said when Ethan called him. "Let me return the favor." "I might be putting you in danger, brother." "I've been in danger my whole life. At least this time, it's for a good cause." The flight to Geneva left the next morning. Ethan spent his last night at home holding Sophie, reading her favorite books, singing her to sleep the way he had when she was a baby. "Why do you have to go, Daddy?" she asked, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Because there are people who need help, sweetheart. People who don't have anyone to speak for them." "Like you didn't have anyone to speak for you?" "Yes, baby. Exactly like that." "And you're going to help them? Like Mr. Ben helped you?" "I'm going to try." Sophie nodded seriously, with the gravity that only children can muster. "Okay, Daddy, but you have to promise to come back." "I promise." "Cross your heart?" Ethan crossed his heart. "Cross my heart." She fell asleep with her hand clutching his shirt, and Ethan held her until dawn, memorizing the weight of her in his arms, the sound of her breathing, the smell of strawberry shampoo in her hair. Whatever happened in Geneva, whatever he found in that safety deposit box, he would come back to her. He had promised, and Ethan Mercer never broke a promise. The flight to Geneva was 11 hours of turbulence and sleepless thinking. Ethan sat in economy class, wedged between a businessman who snored and a teenager who played video games with the volume too loud. He didn't mind. The noise gave him something to focus on besides the fear gnawing at his stomach. Agent Cross had wanted to send a team with him. Ethan refused. "If I show up with federal agents, they'll know something's wrong. I need to do this quietly." "Quietly gets people killed," Cross had warned. "So does making noise at the wrong time." They had compromised. Cross would have local contacts watching the bank from a distance. If Ethan didn't check in every 4 hours, they would move in. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. The plane landed at Geneva International just after dawn. Ethan cleared customs with nothing but a carry-on bag and a heart full of questions. The passport control officer barely glanced at him. Just another American tourist, unremarkable in every way. That was the point. Invisible. The way his father had taught him to be. The International Helvetia Bank was located in the Old Town, in a building that looked like it had been standing since before America was a country. Stone walls, iron gates, the kind of architecture that whispered of old money and older secrets. Ethan approached the entrance and felt his phone buzz. A text from an unknown number. "You're being followed. Gray jacket, black cap, 20 meters behind you. Don't look." His blood went cold. He kept walking, forcing himself not to turn around. Another text. "Cross's team. Just making sure you get there safe. Proceed normally." Ethan exhaled slowly. He pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the bank's lobby. A young woman in an immaculate suit approached him immediately. "Good morning, sir. How may I assist you?" "I have a safety deposit box under the name Walter Mercer." The woman's professional smile didn't waver. "Of course, sir. Please, follow me." She led him through a series of corridors, each one requiring a different security clearance. Finally, they reached a small private room with a single table and 2 chairs.
The box is number 4721, the woman said. You will need to provide biometric verification and a verbal passphrase. Are you prepared? Ethan nodded. She placed a small device on the table. Please press your thumb to the scanner. He did. A green light flashed. Biometric confirmed. Now, please state your passphrase. Ethan took a breath. He thought of his father's voice, the quiet steadiness that never wavered, no matter how hard life got. The words he said every night, a mantra, a prayer, a promise. Language is power. They cannot take from you what you know. The woman typed something into her tablet, waited, then smiled. Verification complete, Mr. Mercer. Please, wait here. The box will be brought to you shortly. She left, and Ethan was alone with his thoughts. He checked his phone. No new messages from Cross's team. No alerts. Just the quiet hum of climate-controlled air and the distant sound of footsteps somewhere in the building. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Two men in suits carried in a metal box roughly the size of a small suitcase. They placed it on the table, nodded at Ethan, and left without a word. Ethan stared at the box. His father's life work, his father's secrets. Whatever was inside had been important enough to die for, or at least to disappear for. He lifted the lid. The first thing he saw was a photograph. His father, younger than Ethan had ever known him, standing in front of an embassy building. Beside him was a woman Ethan didn't recognize. Beautiful, with kind eyes and a smile that looked like it had secrets. On the back of the photo, handwritten, Washington, 1995, the day I decided to fight. Ethan set the photo aside and looked at what lay beneath. Folders, dozens of them, each one labeled in his father's careful handwriting. Names of diplomats, organized by country, dates spanning 3 decades. And in each folder, documents, photographs, and something Ethan hadn't expected. Cassette tapes. He picked up the first tape. The label read, Maria, age 14, Colombia. Testimony recorded March 2010. His hands trembled as he opened another folder. This one contained a stack of handwritten letters, all in Spanish. He read the first one, translating as he went. Dear Mr. Walter, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. Because of you, my daughter is home. She is safe. She is learning to smile again. The men who took her are still free, still hurting other children. But at least my Maria is alive. You are a saint. You are an angel. God bless you forever. There were hundreds of letters, in Spanish, in Russian, in Mandarin, in Arabic, in languages Ethan recognized, and some he didn't. All of them thanking his father. All of them describing children who had been rescued, families who had been reunited, lives that had been saved. Ethan had known his father was gathering evidence against traffickers. He hadn't known his father was also saving people, one by one, quietly, invisibly, over the course of 30 years. Oh, Dad, Ethan whispered, you never told me any of this. At the bottom of the box was a thick manila envelope with Ethan's name on it. He opened it and found a letter written in English, in his father's careful hand. My son, if you are reading this, then you have proven yourself to the world. You have shown them what you can do. And now you know the truth about who I was and what I did. I was not always a cleaner. Before I came to America, I was a teacher. I taught languages to young people who dreamed of a better life. When the factory closed and took everything from our town, I lost my school, my students, my purpose. I came to the city with nothing but my languages and my shame. For years I pushed a mop and kept my head down. I told myself I was just surviving. But then I started working for the diplomatic families, and I started hearing things, terrible things. And I realized that the same evil that destroys small towns was alive and well in the highest circles of power. I could not save our town. I could not save my students. But I could save the children I heard about in whispered conversations, the ones being moved like cargo from country to country. So I started listening. I started documenting. And when I could, I started helping. The woman in the photograph is Elena. She was my contact inside the network, a survivor who had escaped and dedicated her life to helping others do the same. She died in 2015, killed by the same people we were fighting. Her death almost broke me. But I kept going, because stopping would have meant her sacrifice was for nothing. Ethan, I never wanted this life for you. I wanted you to have peace, stability, a normal existence. But you are my son, and you inherited my stubbornness, along with my gift for languages. If you have come this far, I know you will not turn back. In this box, you will find everything. 30 years of evidence, testimony, documentation. It is enough to destroy the network, to put dozens of people in prison, to save hundreds of lives. But it is also dangerous. The moment you make this public, you will become a target. So be careful, my son. Be smart. And whatever happens, never forget why we fight. Not for revenge, not for glory, but for the children who have no voice, the families who have no power, the invisible people who suffer in silence while the world looks away. You are my greatest achievement, Ethan, not because of your languages, but because of your heart. I am proud of you. I was always proud of you. Your father, Walter. Ethan read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words hit harder. His father had been a hero, a quiet, invisible hero who had saved lives while the world thought he was just pushing a mop. He gathered everything, the folders, the tapes, the letters, the photographs, and placed them carefully back in the box. This evidence was worth more than money. It was worth lives, and he would make sure it reached the right hands. As he stood to leave, the door opened. A man walked in. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who was used to being feared. "Mr. Mercer," the man said, "I was hoping we could have a conversation." Ethan's heart began to pound. "Who are you?" "My name is Victor Dreyos. I represent certain interests who are very concerned about the contents of that box." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please." Dreyos smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Let's not insult each other's intelligence. Your father was a thorn in our side for 30 years. We thought the problem was solved when he retired, but apparently he left behind a legacy." Ethan calculated the distance to the door. Too far. Dreyos was blocking the exit. "What do you want?" "A simple exchange. You give me the box, and you walk away. Go back to America. Raise your daughter. Live a quiet life. No one needs to get hurt." "And if I refuse?" Dreyos's smile disappeared. "Then things become complicated. Your daughter, Sophie, isn't it? She's staying with a retired school teacher. Nice neighborhood. Quiet. The kind of place where screams might go unnoticed." The fear in Ethan's chest transformed into something else. Something harder. Something colder. "You're threatening my daughter." "I'm offering you a choice. The box or your family. It's very simple." Ethan looked at the man who represented everything his father had fought against. The arrogance, The cruelty, the absolute certainty that money and power made them untouchable. My father spent 30 years fighting people like you, Ethan said quietly. He saved hundreds of lives. He documented every crime, every victim, every name. And you thought you could make all of that disappear by making him disappear. Your father was a fool. A noble fool, perhaps, but a fool nonetheless. He thought he could change the world by collecting papers and recording conversations. But the world doesn't change, Mr. Mercer. It just keeps turning. And the powerful stay powerful. And the weak stay weak. Then why are you here? Dreos paused. Why come yourself? Ethan pressed. Why not send someone else? If you're so confident that this doesn't matter, why bother threatening a nobody like me? For the first time, something flickered in Dreos's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or fear. Because you're not a nobody anymore, are you? Ethan continued. The whole world watched me prove 11 professors wrong. The whole world saw a judge forced to apologize. I'm famous now. If something happens to me, if I disappear the way my father did, people will ask questions. Journalists will dig. The story won't just die. He took a step forward. That's why you're scared, not of me, but of what I represent. For 30 years you operated in the shadows. You used money and connections and violence to stay hidden. But my father understood something you didn't. Ethan's voice grew stronger. The truth doesn't need power. It just needs a voice. Dreos's hand moved toward his jacket. I wouldn't do that, Ethan said calmly. There are federal agents outside this building. Swiss police have been notified. And I've already sent copies of everything in this box to 3 different news organizations, set to release automatically if I don't check in within the hour. It was a bluff. Ethan had done nothing of the sort. But Dreos didn't know that. You're lying. Maybe. Are you willing to bet your freedom on it? The two men stared at each other. Seconds stretched into eternity. And then Dreos smiled again. But this time, it was different. Colder. More dangerous. You're more like your father than I expected. He was a stubborn bastard, too. He stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. Go ahead, Mr. Mercer. Take your box. Tell your story. But remember this. We've been operating for 100 years. We've survived governments, wars, revolutions. We'll survive you, too. Ethan picked up the box and walked toward the door. Every step felt like an eternity. He expected to feel a hand on his shoulder, a knife in his back, something. Nothing came. He reached the door and paused. One more thing, Ethan said without turning around. Richard Blackwood, the man you planted in my case. I want him. Blackwood is a contractor. He does what he's paid to do. Then tell him to start running, because when this is over, I'm coming for everyone involved. Everyone. He walked out of the room, down the corridors, through the lobby, and into the gray Geneva morning. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. But he was alive, and he had the evidence. Agent Cross's team was waiting in a black van parked across the street. Ethan climbed in, and the van pulled away before the door was even closed. His hands were still shaking. The metal box sat heavy on his lap, containing 30 years of his father's secret life. Jesus Christ, Cross said, staring at him. What happened in there? We lost audio for 15 minutes. They found me. A man named Victor Dreos. Cross's face went pale. Dreos was in there? In person? You know him? He's a ghost. We've been trying to identify the network's leadership for years. Dreos is the closest thing to a name we've ever had. Cross looked at the box in Ethan's hands. What did you tell him? I told him I was going to destroy everything he'd built. And he just let you walk out? He didn't have a choice. Ethan opened the box and pulled out a folder at random. My father gave me everything, Cross. 30 years of evidence. Names, dates, testimonies, documents. This is enough to bring down the whole network. Cross took the folder, his hands trembling. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with each one. My God, this is everything. We've been looking for this kind of evidence for decades. Then let's use it. The flight back to America was different. Ethan sat in first class, Cross's doing, surrounded by federal agents who pretended to be businessmen and tourists. The box was secured in a special compartment, guarded at all times. Ethan spent the flight listening to the cassette tapes on a portable player Cross had provided. One by one, he heard the voices of the people his father had saved. Maria from Colombia, who had been taken at 14 and rescued at 15. Yuki from Japan, who had been sold by her own family and freed by a stranger who spoke her language. Ahmed from Syria, who had escaped a smuggling operation with his little sister because a quiet American man had told them exactly where to run. Each story was different. Each story was the same. Children who had been treated as commodities, as objects, as less than human. And in each story, his father appeared, not as a hero, but as a helper, a voice in the darkness, speaking their language, telling them they weren't alone. When Ethan finished the last tape, he sat in silence for a long time. His father had never sought recognition. He had never asked for thanks or praise. He had simply done what needed to be done, one life at a time, for 30 years. And now it was Ethan's turn. They landed in New York just after midnight. Cross had arranged a secure location, a safe house in a quiet neighborhood where Ethan could plan his next move. But first, he had a phone call to make. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was sleepy but happy. "Daddy, you called. Mrs. Patterson said you might call." "Hey, baby, I missed you so much." "I missed you too. Did you find what you were looking for?" Ethan looked at the box of evidence sitting on the table. His father's life work. The voices of hundreds of victims. The proof of crimes that had been hidden for generations. "Yes, sweetheart, I found it." "Is it something good?" "It's something important. Something that's going to help a lot of people." "Like how you help me when I'm scared?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah, baby, exactly like that." "Then I'm proud of you, Daddy. Grandpa would be proud too." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the tears he had been holding back for days finally beginning to fall. "I hope so, Lily. I really hope so." After they hung up, Ethan sat alone in the safe house, surrounded by 30 years of evidence and the weight of what came next. He thought about his father's letter, the words that had guided Walter Mercer through decades of invisible heroism. Not for revenge, not for glory, but for the children who have no voice, the families who have no power, the invisible people who suffer in silence. Ethan understood now. This had never been about proving himself to the world. It had never been about defeating Judge Crawford or exposing Professor Vaughn or bringing down the network. It was about giving voice to the voiceless. The press conference was scheduled for 9 in the morning. By 7, the room was already packed. Ethan stood backstage, watching through a crack in the curtain as journalists from every major network jostled for position. CNN, Fox, BBC, Al Jazeera, Reuters, The New York Times, The Washington Post. They were all there, cameras ready, notepads out, waiting for the story that would dominate headlines for months. "You ready for this?" Cross asked, adjusting his tie nervously. "No," Ethan admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." "That's usually how courage works." Ben Walsh appeared at Ethan's side, clutching a folder full of legal documents. "Okay, here's the situation. We've coordinated with the FBI, Interpol, and 6 different national law enforcement agencies. The moment you start talking, simultaneous raids will begin in 12 countries. We're looking at over 40 arrests in the first wave alone." "And Blackwood?" "Being picked up as we speak. He tried to flee to the Cayman Islands last night. Coast Guard intercepted his boat 3 miles offshore." Ben smiled grimly. "He's going to spend a very long time in a very small cell." Ethan nodded. It wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough for the lives that had been destroyed. But it was a start. "There's something else," Cross said quietly. "We got word this morning. Victor Dreos was found dead in his Geneva hotel room. Apparent suicide." Ethan felt nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. No sense of justice served. Just emptiness. He took the coward's way out. He knew what was coming. The evidence your father gathered. It implicates Dreos in over 200 cases of trafficking spanning 3 decades. He would have spent the rest of his life in prison. Cross paused. Some people can't face accountability. The stage manager appeared. "Mr. Mercer, we're ready for you." Ethan took a deep breath. He thought about his father pushing a mop through empty hallways, listening to conversations in a dozen languages, quietly saving lives while the world ignored him. He thought about Sophie waiting at home with Mrs. Patterson, watching the TV with wide eyes. He thought about all the children in those cassette tapes, the ones who had been saved, and the ones who hadn't. "Let's do this." He walked onto the stage. The room exploded with camera flashes and shouted questions. Ethan waited until the noise died down, then leaned into the microphone. "My name is Ethan Mercer. 3 weeks ago, I was arrested for fraud. A judge laughed at me in open court when I said I spoke 11 languages. She called me a liar, a con man, a desperate nobody from Ohio who was trying to cheat the system." He paused, letting the words settle. She was wrong. Evidence of crimes that implicated diplomats, businessmen, government officials on 3 continents. And when he was finished, he looked directly into the cameras and said, "My father spent 30 years fighting this battle alone. He died, or disappeared, before he could see it through. But he left me everything I needed to finish what he started. Today, with the help of the FBI, Interpol, and law enforcement agencies around the world, we are taking down a network that has trafficked thousands of human beings across international borders." He paused. "This is not the end. This is just the beginning." The questions came like a flood. Ethan answered every one, speaking in whatever language the journalists preferred. Mandarin for the Chinese reporters, Arabic for Al Jazeera, French for the European press. Each time he switched languages, he saw the amazement on their faces. And he thought about Judge Crawford laughing at him in that courtroom. Who's laughing now? The aftermath was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, Ethan's face was on every news channel in the world. The story of the janitor's son who exposed an international trafficking ring became front-page news from New York to Tokyo. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Voice for the Voiceless. Hashtag Justice for the Invisible. Hashtag Mercer Hero. The arrests came in waves, 43 in the first week, then another 67, then more. Diplomats were stripped of their immunity. Businessmen were dragged from their mansions in handcuffs. Politicians resigned in disgrace. The network that had operated in shadows for a century was being dragged into the light, one name at a time. Richard Blackwood was among the first to be tried. Ethan attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, watching as the man who had tried to destroy his life was systematically destroyed by the evidence. On the day of sentencing, Blackwood turned and looked at Ethan.
"You think you've won?" he spat. "You think this changes anything? There will always be people like me. There will always be a market. You can't stop human nature." Ethan stood and walked to the barrier separating them. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I can make sure people like you spend the rest of their lives in cages. And I can make sure the world never forgets what you did." Blackwood was sentenced to 47 years without possibility of parole. As the guards led him away, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Not triumph, but peace. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. And justice had been served. 3 months after the press conference, Ethan received a phone call. "Mr. Mercer, this is Ambassador Klaus Zimmermann from the United Nations. I wonder if we might meet." They met in New York, in a conference room overlooking the East River. Zimmermann was a tall German man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Your work has been extraordinary," Zimmermann said. "The evidence your father gathered, the testimonies you translated, the attention you've brought to this issue. It has accomplished more in 3 months than our anti-trafficking initiatives have achieved in a decade." "I had good material to work with," Ethan replied. "My father did the hard work. I just told the story." "You're too modest. What you did required courage, intelligence, and something else. Empathy. You didn't just translate those testimonies. You felt them. You made the world feel them." Zimmermann leaned forward. "That's why I'm here. The United Nations is creating a new position, Special Translator for Human Rights. Your job would be to give voice to people the world needs to hear. Victims, witnesses, survivors, people whose stories are trapped behind language barriers." Ethan was silent for a moment. "That's a big job." "It is, but I believe you're the only person who can do it." "I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. I can't be traveling the world all the time." "We would accommodate that. Flexible schedule, remote work when possible, full support for your family." Zimmermann smiled. "Mr. Mercer, your father spent 30 years fighting this battle in the shadows. You have a chance to continue his work in the light, to make sure that what he sacrificed wasn't in vain." Ethan thought about Sophie. He thought about the promise he had made to her, to always come home. But he also thought about the children in those tapes, the ones who were still out there, waiting to be found. "I'll do it," he said, "on one condition." "Name it." "I want to create a program to identify and train people like me, people with language gifts who never got the credentials to prove it, people the system overlooked and underestimated. They're out there, Ambassador, thousands of them. Maybe millions. And they could be doing this work too, if someone gave them a chance." Zimmermann nodded slowly. "That's an excellent idea. Consider it done." They shook hands, and Ethan felt something shift inside him. This was what he was meant to do. Not just speak languages, but use them. Not just translate words, but translate pain into justice, silence into truth. His father had planted the seeds. Now Ethan would grow the garden. 6 months later, Ethan stood in the same courtroom where he had once been humiliated. But this time, he wasn't a defendant. He was a keynote speaker at an international conference on linguistic justice, hosted by the very institution that had tried to destroy him. The room was packed with judges, lawyers, professors, and journalists from around the world. And in the back row, almost hidden behind a pillar, sat Helena Crawford. She had retired from the bench 3 months after Ethan's acquittal. The publicity surrounding the case had triggered investigations into her other rulings, revealing a pattern of bias and misconduct that ended her career in disgrace. She had lost her pension,
her reputation, everything she had spent decades building. Ethan saw her as he took the stage. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Crawford looked away first. "Good morning," Ethan began. "I want to tell you a story about invisibility." He spoke for an hour about his father, about the children who had been saved, about the network that had been dismantled. He spoke about language as a tool of power, and language as a bridge between worlds. He spoke about the importance of listening to voices that had been silenced, of seeing people who had been overlooked. And then, near the end, he said something that made the entire room go still. "6 months ago, I stood in this building, in handcuffs. A judge laughed at me because I claimed to speak 11 languages. She called me a liar without hearing a single word of evidence. She assumed she knew everything about me based on where I came from and what my father did for a living." He paused. "That judge was wrong. But I don't hate her for it, because she taught me something valuable. She taught me what it feels like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to have your truth rejected before you even have a chance to speak it." Ethan looked directly at Crawford. "I know you're here, Judge. I know you've been watching my story unfold. And I want you to know, I forgive you." The room went completely silent. "I forgive you because holding on to anger would only poison me. I forgive you because my father taught me that vengeance is a trap that destroys the person who seeks it. And I forgive you because I hope, I truly hope, that what happened to you will make you a better person. That you'll use your experience to help others avoid the mistakes you made." Crawford's face crumpled. She put her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back tears. "That's what justice really is," Ethan continued. "Not punishment, not revenge, but transformation. The chance to become better than we were. The chance to see what we couldn't see before." After the speech, Crawford approached him. She looked smaller than he remembered, diminished in a way that went beyond physical size. "Mr. Mercer, Ethan, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything." "No, I need to. I need you to know that I've spent every day since your trial thinking about what I did. The arrogance, the cruelty, the absolute certainty that I knew who you were." She wiped her eyes. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, truly sorry." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He saw the broken woman before him, stripped of her power, her prestige, her certainty. He could have walked away. He could have let her suffer in silence. But that wasn't who his father had raised him to be. "Judge Crawford," he said quietly, "my foundation is starting a program to train legal professionals in recognizing and overcoming bias. We need advisors, people who understand how the system fails and how to fix it. Would you be interested?" Crawford stared at him in disbelief. "You're offering me a job? After everything I did to you?" "I'm offering you a chance to do better. That's all any of us can ask for." She started to cry openly then, not caring who saw. "Thank you. Thank you. I don't deserve this." "No," Ethan agreed. "You don't. But deserving isn't the point. Doing better is the point." 1 year after the press conference, Ethan stood in front of a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. He had finally been able to give his father a proper burial. The FBI had located Walter's remains in an unmarked grave outside Geneva. Confirmation that he had been killed, not died of natural causes. The men responsible were now in prison, and Walter Mercer could finally rest. Sophie held Ethan's hand as they stood before the headstone. The inscription read, "Walter Mercer, 1955 to 2022. Teacher, father, hero. He gave voice to the voiceless."
Daddy, why are you crying? Because I miss him, sweetheart. Because I wish he could see all of this. Maybe he can. Sophie squeezed his hand. Mrs. Patterson says people who die become angels, and angels can see everything. Ethan smiled through his tears. Maybe she's right. Daddy? Yes, baby? Can I say something to Grandpa? Of course. Sophie stepped forward and placed a small bouquet of flowers on the grave. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a clear, strong voice. Hi, Grandpa. I never met you, but Daddy tells me stories about you all the time. He says you were very brave and very kind, and you helped a lot of people. I want to be like you when I grow up. She paused. I'm learning German from Daddy. He says you would have liked that. I can say, Ich liebe dich now. That means, I love you. She turned back to Ethan. Did I say it right? Ethan knelt down and hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his face. You said it perfectly, baby. Absolutely perfectly. They stayed at the cemetery until the sun began to set. Then Ethan took Sophie's hand, and they walked back to the car together. Daddy? Yes? Are you going to keep helping people like Grandpa did? Yes, sweetheart, for as long as I can. Good. Sophie nodded with the serious gravity that only children can muster. Because there are a lot of people who need help, and you're really good at helping. Ethan smiled. How did you get so smart? I learned from you. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat in his study, surrounded by the evidence of his new life. Awards on the walls, letters from survivors, photographs of children who had been saved because of his work. On his desk was a small framed picture, the one from the safety deposit box, showing his father standing in front of an embassy in Washington, 1995, the day he had decided to fight. Ethan picked up the frame and looked at his father's young face. So much had changed since that photograph was taken. So much had been lost. But so much had been gained, too. I did it, Dad, Ethan whispered. I finished what you started. The network is broken. Hundreds of people are in prison. Thousands of lives have been saved. And I'm training a whole new generation to continue the work. He set the frame down gently. I wish you could have seen it. I wish you could have met Sophie when she was older. I wish we had more time. He paused, feeling the weight of everything unsaid. But I understand now why you did what you did, why you kept it secret, why you sacrificed so much. You weren't just gathering evidence. You were planting seeds, and those seeds have grown into something bigger than either of us could have imagined. Ethan looked out the window at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, children were sleeping safely because of his father's work. Families were together because of evidence gathered by a man with a mop. Lives had been transformed because someone had chosen to listen when everyone else looked away. I'm going to make you proud, Dad. Every day. For the rest of my life. That's my promise to you. The next morning, Ethan arrived at his office at the United Nations to find a young woman waiting for him. She was maybe 20 years old, with nervous eyes and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She wore clothes that had been mended too many times and shoes that had walked too many miles. But there was something in her face, a determination that reminded Ethan of himself, standing in that courtroom 18 months ago, asking for 5 minutes to prove who he really was. Mr. Mercer? Her voice trembled slightly. My name is Isabella Santos. I saw your story on the news. I came all the way from Texas because I didn't know where else to go. Ethan set down his briefcase. How can I help you, Isabella? I speak 6 languages: Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, English, and Haitian Creole. I learned them all from the families my mother worked for. She was a housekeeper, cleaned hotel rooms until her back gave out. Now she lives with me in a one-bedroom apartment, and we can barely pay the rent." Isabella's voice broke. "Everyone told me my languages were useless, that without a degree, I'd never be anything but a maid like my mother. The translation agencies wouldn't even let me take a test. They looked at my address, at my clothes, at my last name, and they decided I wasn't worth their time." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But then I saw you on TV. I saw you standing in that courtroom, proving all those professors wrong.
And I thought, maybe they're wrong about me, too. Maybe there's a place for people like us." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He remembered standing on the courthouse steps after his acquittal. He remembered the weight of his father's letter in his pocket. He remembered the moment he realized that his victory meant nothing if he didn't use it to help others. "Where are you from, Isabella?" "Houston. My mother came from Mexico when she was 17. Crossed the border with nothing but the clothes on her back. She worked 3 jobs to put food on the table. She never complained, never asked for anything. She just kept going, one day at a time." Isabella looked down at her worn shoes. "She always told me, 'Mija, your brain is the one thing they can't take from you. Learn everything you can. Be more than what they expect you to be.'" Ethan's throat tightened. The words were different, but the meaning was the same. The same thing his father had told him, night after night, year after year. Language is power. They cannot take from you what you know. "Tell me your story, Isabella. All of it." She did. She told him about growing up in the back rooms of hotels while her mother cleaned, about playing with the children of wealthy guests while her mother scrubbed their toilets, about learning French from a diplomat's daughter who became her best friend for 3 weeks before the family checked out and Isabella never saw her again. She told him about the loneliness of losing people over and over, about the gift of languages that grew with each goodbye, about the invisible education she received while the world looked right through her. When she finished, Ethan picked up his phone. "Maria, I'm sending you someone special. Her name is Isabella Santos. Give her everything she needs." Isabella stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "Just like that? You don't need to see my credentials? You don't need proof?" "I've seen all the proof I need," Ethan said. "I saw it in your eyes the moment you walked in. The same look I used to see in my father's eyes. The same look I see in my own mirror every morning." He stood and walked around his desk. "Isabella, I spent 41 years being invisible. 41 years of people looking at my background and deciding they already knew everything about me. And then one day, I got a chance to prove them wrong. Not because I deserved it more than anyone else, but because the circumstances aligned in a way that finally let my voice be heard." He put his hand on her shoulder. "You deserve that same chance. Everyone does. That's why I do this work. Not to prove anything to the people who doubted me, but to make sure that no one else has to fight as hard as I did just to be seen." Isabella couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears falling freely. "Thank you," she finally whispered. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you." "You repay me by helping others. That's how this works. My father helped people in the shadows for 30 years. I help you, you help someone else. The chain never breaks." He walked her to the door. "One more thing, Isabella. When you finish your training, when you're ready to do this work, I want you to remember something." "What's that?" "Remember what it felt like to be invisible. Remember the pain of being overlooked. Remember the anger of being dismissed before you even had a chance to speak. and use that memory to fuel your compassion. Because every person you help will have felt the same way. And they need to know that someone sees them, someone hears them, someone believes in them. Isabella hugged him then, a fierce, sudden embrace that caught Ethan off guard. "I won't let you down," she said. "I promise." "I know you won't." As she left, Ethan looked at the photograph on his desk one more time. His father's face seemed to be smiling. This was the legacy. Not the awards or the headlines or the arrests, but the chain of people helping people. Voice giving rise to voice. The invisible becoming visible, one person at a time. 2 years after the courtroom victory, Ethan stood before the United Nations General Assembly. The room was filled with representatives from 193 countries. Translators sat in booths around the perimeter, ready to convert his words into dozens of languages. Cameras broadcast his face to billions of people around the world. But Ethan wasn't nervous. He had faced worse odds in that courtroom. He had stared down Victor Dreyos in a Geneva bank vault. He had held his daughter while she cried, not knowing if he would ever come home. This was easy by comparison. "Distinguished delegates," he began, "I stand before you today not as a diplomat or a politician, not as an expert or an academic. I stand before you as the son of a janitor, a man who cleaned your offices and your homes, a man who was invisible to most of the world." He paused, letting the translators catch up. "My father, Walter Mercer, spent 50 years of his life pushing a mop. And for 30 of those years, he was also fighting a secret war against human trafficking. He saved hundreds of lives. He documented crimes that spanned 3 continents, and he did it all without recognition, without support, without anyone knowing his name." Ethan looked around the room, meeting the eyes of delegates from every corner of the world. He did it because he understood something that many of us forget. The invisible people of this world, the cleaners, the housekeepers, the workers who empty our trash and wash our dishes, they see everything. They hear everything. They know secrets that would shake governments and topple empires. He leaned into the microphone. "And they do this work not because they're paid to, not because they're asked to, but because they have something that the powerful often lack: conscience, compassion, the simple human inability to look away when others are suffering." The room was completely silent. "Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Walter Mercer Foundation for Linguistic Justice. This foundation will identify and train people around the world who possess extraordinary language abilities but lack the credentials to prove them. We will give them the tools they need to become advocates for the voiceless, translators for the forgotten, bridges between worlds that have been separated by barriers of language and class." Ethan held up a folder. "In the past 2 years, our pilot program has trained 47 people from 12 different countries. Former housekeepers, former factory workers, former refugees, people who learned languages the way I did, not in universities, but in the back rooms of hotels and the kitchens of restaurants and the playgrounds of embassy compounds." He opened the folder. "These 47 people have already helped document over 300 cases of human rights violations. They have translated testimonies that would otherwise have been lost. They have given voice to victims who had no one else to speak for them." Ethan closed the folder and looked directly into the cameras. "My father used to say that language is power. He was right. But power means nothing if it isn't used. The ability to speak means nothing if no one is willing to listen." He spread his hands. "I'm asking you to listen. I'm asking you to see the invisible people in your own countries, in your own communities, in your own homes. I'm asking you to recognize that talent and courage and compassion exist everywhere. Not just in the halls of universities and the offices of governments, but in the people who clean those halls and offices. His voice grew stronger. My father was a janitor, but he was also a hero. And there are millions more like him out there, waiting for the chance to prove what they can do, waiting for someone to believe in them. Ethan stepped back from the microphone. Thank you. The applause began slowly, scattered clapping from a few delegates. Then it grew and grew until the entire General Assembly was on its feet, applauding a janitor's son who had found his voice and used it to change the world. That evening, Ethan received a call from Agent Cross. You watching the news? No, why? Turn it on, any channel. Ethan grabbed the remote and clicked on the television. His own face filled the screen. Footage from the UN speech, playing on repeat across every network.
But that wasn't what Cross was calling about. Look at the banner, Cross said. Ethan read the words scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Breaking. Network collapse. 127 more arrests in coordinated global operation. It's happening, Cross said. The evidence your father gathered. We've finally traced it all the way to the top. Finance ministers, corporate executives, 3 sitting members of parliament in European countries. We're dismantling everything they built, every safe house, every shipping route, every financial account. Ethan sat down heavily on the couch. How many? How many what? How many victims? How many people have been saved? Cross was quiet for a moment. Since your press conference? Conservatively? Over 2,000. Women, children, families. All of them freed because of the evidence your father spent 30 years collecting. 2,000. Ethan thought about his father, working alone in the shadows for 3 decades. Documenting, recording, saving lives one at a time while the world thought he was just emptying trash cans. He would have been proud, Cross said quietly. Your old man. He would have been so damn proud of what you've done. Ethan couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. You okay? Yeah, Ethan finally managed. Yeah, I'm okay. I just need a minute. Take all the time you need. You've earned it. After Cross hung up, Ethan sat in the darkness for a long time. 2,000 lives. 2,000 people who would go home to their families. 2,000 people who would sleep safely tonight. 2,000 people who would wake up tomorrow without fear. And all of it started with a janitor who refused to look away. Ethan picked up the photograph of his father and held it to his chest. We did it, Dad. We really did it. 5 years later, Ethan stood at the podium of the Linguistic Justice Training Center, a state-of-the-art facility that had once been an abandoned factory in his hometown of Youngstown, Ohio. The building had been transformed. Where rusting machinery once stood, there were now classrooms and computer labs and recording studios. Where workers had once assembled car parts, students now learned to bridge the gaps between languages and cultures. The inaugural class of 50 graduates sat before him, their faces bright with hope and determination. They came from 18 different countries. They spoke a combined total of 147 languages, and not one of them had a formal degree in linguistics. They didn't need one. They had something better. They had lived experience. They had the invisible education that only comes from growing up between worlds. 5 years ago, Ethan began, I stood in a courtroom and asked for 5 minutes to prove who I was. A judge laughed at me. A prosecutor called me a con man. The whole world expected me to fail. He smiled. But I didn't fail. Not because I'm special, not because I'm smarter or more talented than anyone else. I didn't fail because my father gave me something more valuable than any degree or certification. He gave me the belief that I was worth something, that my voice mattered,
that the languages I learned in the back rooms of diplomatic houses were just as valid as the ones learned in university classrooms. Ethan looked at the faces before him. The son of a Vietnamese fisherman, the daughter of a Brazilian factory worker, the grandson of an Iraqi refugee. All of them invisible once, all of them seen now. Today, you graduate from this program, but your education is just beginning, because everything you've learned here means nothing if you don't use it. The languages you speak, the cultures you understand,
The bridges you can build between worlds that have never been connected. All of it is meaningless unless you put it in service of something larger than yourself. He gripped the podium. My father spent 30 years fighting in the shadows. He saved hundreds of lives and never asked for recognition. He died, or was killed, before anyone knew his name. But his legacy lives on, in me, in this building, in all of you. Ethan's voice grew thick with emotion. You are his legacy. Every testimony you translate, every victim you help, every voice you amplify. That is my father's work continuing. That is the chain that must never break. He looked at Isabella Santos, who sat in the front row. In 5 years, she had become one of the program's most accomplished graduates, and was now its lead instructor. She had trained over 200 students herself. The chain was already extending further than Ethan had ever imagined. So go out there, Ethan said. Find the invisible people. Listen to their stories. Give them the voice they've been denied. And when you're tired, when you're discouraged, when you wonder if any of this makes a difference, remember my father. Remember a janitor who changed the world, one mop stroke at a time. He stepped back from the podium. Class of 2029, you are dismissed. The applause was deafening. That night, Ethan drove to the cemetery alone. He knelt before his father's grave, the same headstone he had visited dozens of times over the past 5 years. The inscription was unchanged. Walter Mercer, 1955 to 2022. Teacher, father, hero. He gave voice to the voiceless. But Ethan had brought something new. A small metal plaque, which he placed at the base of the headstone. It read, 2,847 lives saved, 312 traffickers imprisoned, 47 countries reached. One janitor started it all. Hey, Dad, Ethan said softly. I brought you the numbers. I know you were never one for counting, but I thought you'd want to know what your work accomplished. He sat down on the grass, his back against the headstone, looking up at the stars. Sophie's doing great. She's 13 now, speaks 4 languages fluently, and she's working on a 5th. She wants to be a translator like her old man. Can you believe that? Your granddaughter, following in our footsteps. Ethan smiled. She never got to meet you, but she knows who you were. I tell her stories every night. About the families you cleaned for, about the languages you learned, about the people you saved when no one was watching. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. I met with Judge Crawford last week. Can you believe she's still working with us? She runs the bias training program now. She's trained over 1,000 judges in the past 3 years, taught them how to see past backgrounds and credentials, taught them to listen before they judge. Ethan laughed softly. The woman who laughed at me in that courtroom is now teaching other judges not to make the same mistake. You would have appreciated the irony, Dad. You always did have a sense of humor about these things. He reached out and touched the cold stone. I miss you. Every day I miss you. I wish you could have seen what we built.
I wish you could have been there when I spoke at the UN, when we opened the training center, when Sophie said her first words in German. His voice broke. But I know you're watching. I know you're proud. And I know that somewhere out there, you're still doing what you always did. Listening, watching, helping people in ways they'll never know. Ethan stood and brushed the grass from his pants. I have to go, Dad. Sophie's waiting for me at home. But I'll be back next week. Same time, same place. He touched the headstone one last time. I love you. I was always proud to be your son. And I'll keep going until my last breath. That's my promise to you. He walked back to his car, but paused at the gate of the cemetery. He turned and looked at the small headstone, barely visible in the darkness. Oh, and Dad, one more thing, he smiled. We're not invisible anymore. When Ethan got home, Sophie was waiting at the kitchen table, a stack of books spread out before her. She looked up as he walked in, her face lighting up the way it always did when she saw him. Daddy, I've been practicing. Listen. She launched into a perfect recitation of a German poem, the same one Mrs. Schmidt had taught Ethan when he was her age, all those decades ago. When she finished, Ethan applauded. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Your pronunciation is even better than mine was at your age. Sophie beamed. Grandpa would be proud, right? Grandpa would be very proud. She ran to him and hugged him tight. Daddy? Yes, baby? Tell me the story again. About Grandpa and the languages and how you proved everybody wrong.
Ethan smiled. It was the same request she made almost every night. The same story he had told 100 times. But he never got tired of telling it, and she never got tired of hearing it. Because this wasn't just a story, it was a legacy. They sat together on the couch, Sophie curled against his side, and Ethan began. Once upon a time, there was a janitor named Walter Mercer. He cleaned offices and houses and embassy buildings, and everyone thought that's all he was. Just a cleaner, just an invisible man pushing a mop. But they were wrong, Sophie whispered, the way she always did. That's right, baby, they were wrong. Because while Walter cleaned, he listened. And while he listened, he learned. And while he learned, he discovered something terrible, something he couldn't ignore. So he started fighting, quietly, invisibly, saving lives one at a time while the whole world looked right through him. And then he had a son, Sophie prompted. And then he had a son. A boy named Ethan, who grew up in the back rooms of diplomatic houses, learning languages from children he would never see again. And that boy grew up to be invisible too, overlooked, underestimated, written off before he even had a chance to prove himself. Until the courtroom, Sophie said. Until the courtroom. Until the day a judge laughed at him and called him a liar. Until the day he stood up and said, "Give me 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to prove who I really am." Sophie looked up at her father with shining eyes. And you did it, Daddy. You proved them all wrong. I did. But not alone. Never alone. I had your grandfather's voice in my head, telling me that language is power. I had the memories of all those families who taught me, all those children who became my friends. And I had you, baby, waiting for me to come home. Ethan kissed the top of her head. That's the real lesson of the story, Sophie. It's not about proving people wrong. It's not about revenge or victory or being better than anyone else. It's about finding your voice and using it to help others find theirs. It's about seeing the invisible people and making sure the world sees them too. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this the way she always did. Daddy? Yes? When I grow up, I want to help invisible people too, like you and Grandpa. Ethan felt his heart swell.
You already do, baby. Every day. Every time you're kind to someone who's overlooked. Every time you listen when others ignore. Every time you speak up for people who can't speak for themselves. He held her close. That's the legacy, Sophie. That's what Grandpa left us. Not money or fame or power, but the knowledge that one person can make a difference. One voice can change the world. One janitor's son can stand in front of the whole world and prove that everyone deserves to be heard. Sophie nodded solemnly. I won't forget, Daddy. I promise.
I know you won't, baby. I know you won't. They sat together in silence as the night deepened around them. Father and daughter. Two links in a chain that stretched back 30 years and would continue long into the future. Outside, the world kept turning. Children were still suffering. Voices were still being silenced. Invisible people were still waiting to be seen. But now there was an army of people ready to help them. 47 graduates from the first class, over 200 from Isabella's training program, thousands more applying every year from every corner of the world. The chain was growing. The chain would never break. Ethan looked at the photograph of his father on the mantel, the same photograph from the Geneva safety deposit box, now in a place of honor in their home. Walter Mercer smiled back at him from across the years. A janitor, a teacher, a father, a hero. Invisible no more. Ethan Mercer had started his journey as a janitor's son who spoke 11 languages. He had been mocked, arrested, humiliated, threatened with prison. A judge had laughed in his face and called him a liar. But he had proven them all wrong, not through anger or revenge, but through truth, through courage, through the simple revolutionary act of refusing to be silent. His father had given him the gift of languages. But the greatest gift was something else entirely. The understanding that every voice matters, that every story deserves to be told, that the invisible people of the world carry within them the power to change everything. And now that power was spreading, growing, multiplying with every student trained, every victim helped, every voice amplified. The janitor's son had become the voice for the voiceless, and his father's legacy would live forever.